Absolutely. The Champions League, probably, without looking too far ahead, that he was looking towards the group stages and the finances, that would have been in the back of his mind. But, for 35 minutes, he said for the first half, for 35 minutes, they were excellent. They were high intensity. They pressed. They won the ball back. Joe Aribo was like a man possessed. I thought Alfredo Morelos was like a man possessed with the energy they had and the drive they had in the team. Scott Wright looked bright. Ryan Kent was lively. Everything seemed to be going. But around about the 35-minute mark, it's as if they hit a wall. And suddenly, Malmo started to pass the ball a bit better, started to find space, because you can't play at that intensity all the time. And it's when you have to take your foot off the gas, is when you have to be hard to play against, drop into your shape. And there's a couple of times in that last 10 minutes of the first half where Morelos was coming short towards the ball and they were looking for him to spin. And John will tell you, when you start getting fatigued as a striker, you come even closer to the ball, and your teammates are saying, we need you to go that way. So that's the spell they needed to manage. And they, were a little bit untidy towards the end of the first half. You think they got away with it. Now get their second win, get the message from the manager, man sent off. But the way they started the second half was so poor. They couldn't keep possession. There was a nervousness in them. There was an expectation to go and win the game because they were down to 10 men. Once the first goal went in, you could see the body language starting to change. And Steven Gerrard spoke about it himself. He spoke about the fear and the anxiety after the game. And it shone through for them, Rob. And then once it went 2-1, it took them 10 or 15 minutes to get grip of the game again, when Malmo, for 10 men, done really well. The shape was good. They kept two strikers up the pitch, Bermancevic and Chorlak. They stayed forward. They kept Rangers honest. And then it was a little bit of desperation football towards the end, of long balls, shots from distance, not enough quality in their crossing. James Tavernier, who's been sensational for Rangers, you've got to say, over his time, particularly with his crosses, but he lost his way. He was hitting the first man. He was hitting it too deep. He crossed into the goalkeeper's hands, and suddenly that builds and confidence drained out of the team. And somehow Steven Gerrard and his coaching staff have to look at it, check it inside out, and work out how that happened.
You could almost go back to the slack 10 minutes that Rangers had last week. If they defended better, you've got to defend for your lives when you're playing at this level. Celtic have been guilty of it as well, being very slack, and you've got to be more clinical. You start the game fantastically well last night. You get the goal very early on, and then you've got to put teams to the sword. You really, really have. You can't be giving teams any encouragement whatsoever. And for me, last week in Malmo, you go 2-0 down and you didn't play badly. Rangers actually did okay last week. They responded very well from going 2-0 down. They got the late goal through Stephen Davis. They got a big opportunity last, and everything was going absolutely brilliant for them. And then defensively, you're all over the place. You almost get a little bit overawed. We're back in this game now.
Yeah, I mean, Steven Gerrard himself spoke about fear and panic in the performance.
You've got to defend for your lives, Rob. At this stage, your career depends on it. And Celtic have been guilty of this as well. You go back last week, all of a sudden Celtic are 3-1 up against Jablonec, the team that they play tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And all they have to do is manage the game. They're not a particularly good game, Jablonec. They'll prove that tomorrow night. I think Celtic will win relatively comfortable. They scored 4 goals, 4 different scorers over there last week, by the way, away from home. So you'll see for yourselves tomorrow night. But all of a sudden, at 3-1, you're thinking, right, next week give yourselves a less pressure game, if you like, where you can qualify and score goals. Next thing is 3-2. And all of a sudden you're thinking, that's just come from slackness. Somebody not quite doing their job. Somebody not closing people down.
Yeah.
Somebody not shifting across early enough defensively. Whatever, you can pick the bones out of all types of goals.
But we're talking about a team that started the season in chaos, really, in the midst of a massive rebuild.
In chaos?
Celtic. In terms of the rebuild Celtic are doing at the moment.
Sorry,
so it's maybe not so surprising that Celtic are in that scenario, but it's really surprising that a team of Rangers' strength and depth that they have, and the squad was much more like it last night, wasn't it? The bench was much better than it was last week. So it's really shocking to see a Rangers team as disorganised, Craigs, as they were last night.
Do you know what might have threw them? They may have anticipated that Malmo would sit in, would go with keep their 3, keep their 5 in midfield and keep 1 up front. And Rangers would have lots of the ball. But they didn't. And that's where you've got to credit John Dahl Tomasson. He kept 2 strikers up the pitch. They worked ever so hard. They pressed high. They gambled a little bit at the back. They thought, if they're probably going to win this, I mean, Craig was saying, manage the first 10, 15 minutes of the second half, don't concede. That's probably the time when Malmo thought, this is where we may have to strike. We may have to be brave. If we can get a goal, if we can get ourselves in front, then we can drop off and we can retreat and we can keep our shape. And that's exactly how it panned out. So I don't know if the Rangers players were caught a little bit cold, Craig, thinking Malmo won't come after us. They're going to drop off and try and take the game to extra time and try and get a breakaway. Because Rangers really were nervous. There was a nervousness about them which wasn't there last year. And people talk about crowds. I'm not a big believer in the crowd thing because they've played in front of big crowds. Braga, they've won at Celtic Park in front of a big crowd. Porto at home, Feyenoord at home in front of a big crowd. So that doesn't faze them. It's just people that are looking for other excuses or other things to talk about, other narratives which aren't there. But, it doesn't suit people's agenda. I think anyway. I think these guys have shown that. So it was just how they managed the opening 10, 12 minutes of the second half. John's right, they didn't manage the opening 3 minutes of the second half last week. So then is there an issue there with the information they're getting at half time or how they're carrying it out?
Tell Alexa to launch Go Radio or listen on the Go Radio app.